Asians in the US are not an underrepresented minority in a tech company. However, others are.
It's interesting that we can call these policies racist now.
Bill Ackman, he's using language that every working class white guy who accidentally found himself on Twitter 10 years ago was saying. Claudine Gay, the Harvard president, is under a lot of fire right now.
I think what's damning is the double standard that she's applied to this speech as opposed to speech during the last 4 or 5 years.
Kwanzaa is a completely manufactured sort of multiculturalism.
The fact that the government is legitimizing it, I mean, there's a new Kwanzaa stamp coming out, what is it, in 2024? Welcome back to the pod, guys. We have a packed show for you today. A bunch of crazy fun topics. The very first thing I want to talk about is a tech story. I think it's part of a much bigger trend that I've been seeing happening here. We have a racist hiring scandal at IBM right now. Scandal to me. I feel like it's sort of not gaining the traction in the media that it should be. But in both directions, it's neither being defended nor attacked, which is weirdly, in my opinion, a sign of progress. Let's just back up for a second. I'm going to break it down for you. So James O'Keefe, Monday evening, releases a video from 2021 in which the CEO of IBM with one of his subordinates at Red Hat, which is a subsidiary of IBM, is talking about the DEI policies at IBM. And he just very casually, happily, they're both sort of chest beating about it, this problem at hand and how they go about it. He reveals that in at least some part, bonuses are tied to the number of Black and Hispanic people and women who are being hired at the company. So it's both a positive thing and a negative. The positive piece is if your executives are hiring enough Black and Hispanics, they're going to get a bonus. And if they're not, their bonus is going to be taken away. He further says, this is the CEO, further says that Asians do not count.
So we take underrepresented and gender. You got to move both forward by a percentage. That leads to a plus on your bonus. By the way, if you lose part of your bonus. I'm not trying to finesse this. So for Blacks, we should try to get towards 13 point something percent. On Hispanics, you got to get into the mid-teens. So let me say it. Asians in the US are not an underrepresented minority in a tech company.
It kind of perfectly encapsulates, I think, a worldview and a perspective on race in America that lives on the very far left. But I also think it's illegal. I think this is a violation of the Civil Rights Act, which is pretty shocking. And the way that people in these seats of power have played really fast and loose with this stuff at some of the biggest and most important companies in the country over the last few years is shocking. And now kind of being released in this new cultural moment is not being received the way that it once was several years ago when a lot of this stuff was first percolating up and being spoken about, the concept of quotas and whatnot. Critically, what has changed in the past few years is a Supreme Court case in which it was ruled unconstitutional for a college to discriminate against people based on their race when it comes to admissions. We're sort of on the path right now to legal challenges, certainly at IBM at this point, and I think probably at companies throughout the industry as more of this stuff starts to be revealed in a public way, which I think it almost has to be revealed because there's such an appetite for it online right now, which is the other, I think, much bigger part of this story, which is the culture has just completely shifted on this. It is no longer considered sort of a nice thing to do. It is met with real anger across the country. And these people, I mean, critically, IBM, I read this piece in Bloomberg and I was surprised. The headline was obviously defensive of the policy and kind of went after James O'Keefe a little bit. But when I read the actual piece, expecting more of that, I didn't see it. What I saw was just an accurate description of what was going on, just sort of details of the story. And that says to me, I mean, the sort of lack of defense of this policy, this, in my opinion, clearly racist hiring policy, was telling. That says that we're sort of entering a new, not only cultural moment, but even a media moment. I was really surprised not to see any defense of this. I don't know. What do you guys make of this?
It's interesting that we can call these policies racist now in 2020, 2021. it was really not okay to call these policies racist, even though on their face they definitely are. And that vibe shift is very interesting to me. People are just saying, this is racist.
Yeah, there's no pushback at all for that.
I haven't seen any.
I mean, I used to I would get dunked on constantly, and it's completely over. I think that you see a little bit more. It's, a lot of this is also X or Twitter is a different platform. I felt it was very different even before Elon took over. I think I wrote about the vibe shift at the time, or maybe just like a little bit after, before he had made any changes. Just the culture felt like it had kind of, it was over this sort of discourse. But even, I mean, you would still expect something. You would expect stories in the press. You would expect something from maybe not the Times, but at least Vox or someone sort of jumping in and defending the CEO. And you don't get that at all. I've asked readers, and I'm asking you guys now, anyone listening, if you guys have any more details on what you've been through at any of these companies when it comes to this stuff, any kind of racist hiring practices, any racist like language, policing, weird contracts you had to sign that were coerced against your will, the culture, anything that felt hostile on these racial lines, I would love to hear about it. I think we are pretty close right now to a reckoning when it comes to the DEI stuff. We've also seen, you see tech figures now, sort of previously fence sitters, openly talking about DEI and using this like it's racist, right? These are not people that you think of as the right-wing trolls, as many of the early canaries in this coal mine were labeled. These are regular guys, just I think you could say maybe thoughtful people who were scared, or they're just the kind of people who capitalize on attention trends. And in either case, what it says to me is things are very different now than they were a few years ago, which brings me to Bill Ackman. So Bill, a big hedge fund guy, took a bunch of money back from Harvard during this sort of yay Hamas shit that's been going on, or yay Hamas drama over the last 2 months, which we're going to get into in a second as it relates specifically to Harvard's president, Claudine Gay. So what I found really interesting about him is he's really like for whatever reason, and maybe we can parse that in a moment, his perspective on Israel-Palestine has shocked him out of the DEI discourse, and he's become sort of like a crusader online against it. And he's using language that is super reminiscent to me of what like every working class white guy who accidentally found himself on Twitter 10 years ago was saying and was being called a total racist for. These are things like, hey, treating people differently because they're white is wrong. Or, hey, if you're black, it doesn't mean that when I criticize you or disagree with you, it's because I'm racist. Or, hey, not everyone who disagrees with you is racist. And it's amusing to me that this is a complete shift, not only across the country, but among the elites, right? This is a billionaire. This is a billionaire who was insulated, I think, from a lot of this. And I guess there were some inklings, Brandon. You mentioned earlier that he had donated some money to Musk for the Twitter stuff. So there is a chance that, Bill is one of these guys who just quietly all along really resented what he was seeing in the culture, but now for whatever reason feels like he, needs to speak up. But generally, I mean, vibe shift, real, not at the companies. What do you think about that before we get into the Harvard stuff specifically?
Yeah, I mean, Bill Ackman's dad was like a real estate financier. And I think this is a trend with a lot of people white people specifically, who went along with the DEI stuff in the beginning and like are all about affirmative action. It's, they feel like they had an advantage because they were white. It was actually just because they were like grew up rich and well connected. And so like now that the tables have sort of turned or whatever, I guess with like some of the Israel-Palestine stuff, and Jewish people are seen as not a minority or like an oppressor class or whatever, they're I guess like kind of getting a bit of a taste of what other people maybe were feeling. And I mean, that's not true for everybody, but I think there is something to be said about like people who grew up with a lot of like wealth and privilege, projecting that onto like all white people in a way that just doesn't actually make sense. And that's why like something like 30 or 40% of white students lie on their college application about their race, they feel like the deck is stacked against them because they are white.
Right. They've definitely, or even if it's not stacked, because stacked against sounds, I think there's less evidence that, well, I mean, maybe that's just what I'm just going to take it on the other side, which would be, it's not maybe necessarily stacked against any one specific person. It's just, there are all of these gifts. If you happen to be able to say, I am this or that race, whatever sort of popular category exists. But I guess, I don't know, maybe that's just the same thing, I guess. I agree generally that this seems to me to be, these were people who had never met a middle-class person in their life, and probably had not met many Black people in their life. And poorer people tend to meet more Black people. And that is why poorer people tend not to understand when they are white and poor, when people tell them they're privileged, because they're in the same fucking places. And it just doesn't make any sense. I was thinking about this in the context of my parents growing up. Like my parents, when I was really young, and they had way less before I was born. We were younger sister and I were the lucky ones. And by lucky, I mean, at that point, my mom was a teacher and my dad was in construction. And so we were living high on the hog. But my mom and dad had 4 kids, and then my aunt and cousin were living in our house for a while, 1 bathroom. It was tight. There were Christmases, every Christmas, parents working 2 jobs. That is something that I think, genuinely, people I don't want to say people, I don't want to beat on Bill here, but I think this rich, white, private school guy from New York just genuinely can't fathom. And maybe for people like him right now, and maybe I see this a lot online right now, there are people who that curtain has been pulled back via the Israel stuff. What do you think, Sanjana?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think a worry I have with some people like Ackman and others who have called for cancellation lists of students involved in pro-Palestine protests, some of whom have said reprehensible things that should probably get them, get internship offers rescinded and things like that. But my worry is that some people who are having this come to Jesus moment where they're realizing that maybe we need to reevaluate the way we talk about these racial categories and discrimination and DEI and things like that are kind of moving toward a mirror image of the cancel culture and insane racial quotas and discrimination that we've derided for the past 3 years and that we've all suffered under. Because I think that at the end of the day, I've seen, I don't know, I don't want to say anything specific about Bill because I haven't actually looked that closely at things he specifically said on Twitter, but I have seen some people celebrating calls for quotas for Jewish students only to have certain jobs and that kind of thing. And it just seems like, do we really want to just reinvent DEI from first principles, in a different way?
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the Pirate Wires pod. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment below, and share this with your friends. Last week, you have a congressional hearing in which, it admits this anti-Semitism discourse that's happening. The idea that college campuses are rife with genocidal speech targeting Jews, Jewish students don't feel safe and whatnot. There is a congressional hearing to discuss this matter. 3 university presidents are brought before Congress to answer questions. And a handful of clips have gone viral. I would say the presidents sounded like idiots. I know there's some disagreement here on that. But certainly what they were doing was defending to steelman what they were, I think, trying to do. They were defending the right of students to dissent politically, I think, is how they see it. And the genocidal speech is always but how do you feel about genocidal speech targeting Jews? And it would be well, that's not allowed. And I think the crux of this problem is many people hear, from the river to the sea and Palestine should be free as a political idea that Palestinians should be maybe integrated into Israel or something. Many people who are on the other side of this see that as literally a call for genocide and specifically targeting Jews. I think that those people, I understand where they're coming from. You have Hamas, which wrote that into their charter. I think you have plenty of examples now that we could cherry pick, right, where at all these different pro-Palestine rallies, you see like the Nazi flag and shit like this. But if you were to separate the edge cases and kind of talk about the issue, are you Palestine or are you Israel or somewhere in between? You kind of have to allow people to talk that out at some point, and even if it's heinous, it's protected by the First Amendment. And are you a university that values that or not? Now, where it gets tricky is they're not. I mean, this is for years. We know that college campuses are not places where you're allowed to say whatever you want. I mean, way less insane things have been run out of college campuses. And Claudine Gay, specifically the Harvard president, is under a lot of fire right now. Brandon, I know you're a huge fan of hers. You were just defending her earlier, but she has a background in the speech policing stuff, right? So like, maybe give me your Claudine Gay take, and then bring me through the hypocrisy of it all.
Sure. First off, Claudine Gay, innocent. No,
should not be fired. That's the question.
I don't think she should
be fired from her job.
The things that she was saying in the clips that I saw of the congressional testimony were correct. It is context dependent. If I'm in my shower singing River to the Sea chants, am I putting anybody in danger? The answer is definitely no. So technically, she's right. This type of speech is context dependent, and it's a nuanced question. I think what's damning is the double standard that she's applied to this speech as opposed to speech during the last 4 or 5 years. For example, she did not reappoint this guy called Ronald Sullivan because he represented Harvey Weinstein, and her logic was students had a right to feel safe, right? So this seems to be almost in direct contradiction in an oblique way.
He's a lawyer. Imagine the idea that a lawyer, this is the lawyer. I mean, if you had a religious tenet of being a lawyer, it is that everybody is entitled to a defense.
Yeah. And so students don't feel safe because this guy is doing it. He defended Harvey Weinstein. That seems at odds with her statements at the congressional testimony. This data science professor, David Kane, invited Charles Murray to speak. Gay blocked that and then did not reappoint David Kane's contract, which was seen as retaliation for the invite. So another problematic example that's pretty damning in light of her statements at the recent congressional testimony that she gave. And then finally, I'll say that the organization FIRE ranks Harvard dead last in its free speech rankings of all American universities. So under her tenure, it's, according to FIRE, Harvard has not respected free speech at all. So it's really, really rich to hear her saying this.
I will say is more about the student body of Harvard. This is a student body that has no tolerance for free speech. And when it comes to, who's going to be allowed on campus and whatnot, most of that comes down to the students deciding. And most of the conservative censorship across the country has come down to students running people off of campus, not the administration. In the Gay case, that's crazy. I didn't even realize the Charles Murray thing. But it is hard for me as someone who cares a lot about free speech. As you, I think everyone, I know everyone in here, this is something that we all talk about quite a lot. It is hard for me to want to see this woman. I don't want to see this woman fired over her comments about free speech being a good thing and should be defended on campus. It's just that she's a liar. We're caught between a rock and a hard place right now, because yes, we have to defend the principle. I believe in the principle. And yet I know that this person does not. And so here we are, like the idiots, defending free speech constantly, no matter what, even when our enemies, our ideological enemies are sort of, in the crosshairs right now. But the moment she gets back to the college campus, it's like all sorts of things that I value or care about are going to be censored. So we're living in this totally asymmetrical space, this world of asymmetric ideological warfare, where one set of ideas is unsafe and therefore censored, and one set of ideas, no matter how anti-Semitic, in my opinion, I know there's disagreement there, but I think calling for war at all or violence against the Israeli people at all could certainly be interpreted along these same lines as a call for violence, in the same way that Charles Murray talking about IQ is seen as violent speech on the Harvard campus. Like, if we're living in a world where nothing there is considered unsafe, then it's, we're living in a world of one-party state style censorship. It starts at Harvard. It then permeates the entire corporate world because Harvard graduates run the entire country, and it's really bad. That's how we got to where we are. So I don't really know what to do here. It's sort of rooting for. I don't want people like this woman in power, and yet I don't know how we alter culture in an environment where the rules are written so we always lose. So, the freedom-oriented people are there's no way that you can win in a situation like this. River, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the way that, even though it is hypocrisy, it's kind of the same thing when you have her canceling Charles Murray or people trying to get her fired for saying the wrong thing in this meeting. It is kind of, in a sense, the same thing. It's like censorship or whatever, but it's perceived in two different ways. When you're doing it on behalf of Black people or Hispanics or whatever, it's perceived as woke. When you're doing it on behalf of Jews, people are like on the extremes, or like they're like, that's a cabal or whatever. There's like there are these tropes on like the far left and the far right about Jewish power and control over the media and like control over institutions and stuff that I think people need to be very careful with when they're making these like broad declarations to like shut people down. It's like people aren't going to perceive that. Even people who hated the woke stuff on, say the far right, they're going to perceive it a little bit differently. You know what I mean? They're not going to perceive it as woke. They're going to perceive it as like these people, this is like a Jewish cabal exercising their power. And like, that's a really scary, like I feel like you run the risk of creating more anti-Semitism when you do stuff like this. And I mean, like, it's not even always Jewish people doing it. It's like, Christian people, like, sort of, I guess, trying to defend Jews, but doing it in like such a heavy-handed way that like two people who are easily influenced could like be used as like, somebody could point to that and be like, look, see how they like treat people who criticize them. And
I definitely see this, if anything, as a moment in which it is proven beyond all doubt that the Jews don't control the media. I mean, it is completely not. The media is not on the side of Israel right now, and has not been since basically like October 10th. I would say it is.
I wish they still did. The movies would be so much better. Yeah.
Sanjana, thoughts on this?
Well, I was just going to add a little bit of context for Claudine Gay.
Oh yeah, give it to me.
If we don't want her fired, I mean, I don't actually have a strongly held opinion on whether or not she should keep her job, but if we don't want to fire her on the basis of defending free speech, which I do think ultimately is what was happening at that hearing, and Fire has written some good, quite legally precise articles about what specifically in a call for genocide would disqualify it as protected speech. But that aside,
has Fire defended her over this or not? Sorry, I hate to interrupt.
Fire has written about, I don't know if they've defended her explicitly, but they've written a good long tweet called "Why Most Calls for Genocide Are Protected Speech," which I recommend people read. They mention UPenn's president in it. But what I was going to say is she's being canceled because it was found by some scholars. I think Chris Rufo was involved in this.
The amplification for sure.
That she plagiarized a big part of her doctoral dissertation.
This one I think that she should go down for, and here is why I think that. Because she's just sloppy and an idiot and incorrectly quoting things. It's like, it's clear to me by reading through that she was not trying to pass off somebody else's work as her own. She's just not very good. And that is these are the mistakes that she made. However, people at Harvard lose their spot in the school for similar behavior. And why is this woman getting a free pass for what is in academia with the safe spaces shit? These are like fundamentalist positions that they hold dear to their heart. And why is she, escaping from both of them? And I think it's pretty obvious. She represents a lot to the people on the very far left. This is why the New York Times can't help. They're falling over themselves to defend this woman. She can't go down because I think she's seen right now as a representative, almost in some sort of totemic way, of the entire DEI order. And if she goes down, that's the end of the whole system. And she hasn't gone down. So, for all of my talk of the vibe shift, it hasn't shifted all the way. And these people still control, the DEI fundamentalists still control every fount of institutional power in the country. They're just a little quieter right now because they know that there's a risk associated with this. Tell me about her cousin.
Her cousin is Roxanne Gay.
It's crazy. So for people who don't know who Roxanne Gay is, Sanjana?
Roxanne Gay is, Brandon, how'd you describe her? She sort of led.
She kind of carried to term the toxic brand of feminism that exploded around 2016 and became sort of the foundational knowledge for a lot of, in my opinion, theory around microaggressions being violent and other in-kind examples of that sort.
She ran a fat studies class at NYU. That I had a friend who was like desperately trying to get a syllabus whenever it came out. He couldn't get one.
She hopped on my radar when she said, nope, didn't say, asked a question, just asking questions. Is drag just woman face, blackface for women? So is a male drag queen doing blackface, basically? And this was at the height of the race and gender sensitivity. So she was, roundly celebrated for that comment, which I think is just, I could talk about, and we have River in the chat, so I know that we could talk about drag shit for the next 3 hours.
That's full circle. That's what like feminists were saying like in like the 70s and shit. Is that like you're mocking women and it's like, yeah, but it's funny.
Like, I think it's more complicated than that. I think that a lot of I think that you have a lot of young gay guys who are called a woman their whole life, and too girly and too effeminate and whatnot, and that just builds some kind of weird idea up in their head, and sort of embracing that like a superhero and laughing at it is not about women at all. I don't think it's ever been about women. I think it's about gay men, and that's what the broader thing here that I think is so annoying is when subcultures get this giant mainstream spotlight on them, and then people don't really understand what's going on. They don't have the context to sort of get it, and then they judge it and say crazy shit about it. Yes, there are some people who are, misogynists and awful and making fun of women, but for the most part, I think it's something deeper and cathartic and funny. And shut the fuck up. Leave us alone.
Yeah.
I don't know. River, do you agree, disagree? Is it?
I generally agree. It's both like a celebration of women, and they're also kind of like poking fun at them. It's like if you're like dressing up as Dolly Parton, but you just make like the breasts like 4 sizes bigger. So it's like, I don't know, like it is like kind of a caricature, but like it's harmless. And I don't think you'd find any drag queen that like actually truly hates women. Most of the time the guys who are like doing drag, they're like the type of gay guys who like mostly have female friends, they're like all like hairstylists or like whatever for their like day job. They like work in these like very like female dominant industries. And I don't think it's like, it's just like it's just fun. It's just, Also, Polya said it was like a resurrection of like pagan cults where like guys used to like castrate themselves and like dress up like the goddess or whatever. It could be that. No, I'm just kidding.
Never that. It's never this. It's these people. The intellectualization. Poglia, go off, but that's not correct. This is sometimes,
but it's great. It's a great line. She makes a great case.
Sometimes a guy in a wig is just a guy in a wig, and that's fine. Is kind of my rough thought about that. The First Amendment's not really what we're talking about here. The First Amendment has nothing to do with what happens on a college campus. All of this speech, including, I think, including genocidal speech. Unless it's not, like you could say something horrific like I am in favor of this thing. Unless you're actually calling for violence in the United States, there's some gnarly shit that you're allowed to say. The question is what's allowed to be said on a college campus where, and this is, I was watching The View because I hate myself the other day, and Sunny Hostin she's a huge pro-Palestine person, and she has been, and none of the other women are, which has been interesting to watch. Strange divide on the left. And Sunny was sort of backed into a corner where she just kept saying, this is to be protected under the First Amendment. This is the opposite of what she has been saying throughout over the last 5 years. Like, yeah, it's protected. What she's been saying over the last 5 years was actually correct, which is that, yes, it's protected under the First Amendment, but we're not talking about the First Amendment on a platform like Twitter or on a college campus that is owned by people who make rules on private property, and that's okay. They can make whatever rules they want. The question in the context of Twitter, I never thought that was a violation of the First Amendment, not allowing right-wing people to speak on Twitter. My question was like, maybe what does a world look like where a couple of few oligopoly speech platforms control the entire flow of information and they make illegal half of the thought in the country? That seems pretty gnarly. Our founding fathers certainly didn't see it coming, and certainly the principle that they were trying to protect with the First Amendment is now in violation in this kind of like more corporatocratic kind of world. It was more complicated. I don't think on this college campus it's quite so complicated as a major platform like Twitter or Facebook. I think it's a little bit less complicated. In fact, the college campus can do, I think, pretty much whatever it wants when it comes to a speech policy, provided it's a private university. And in this case, it sounds like the policy is, playing with genocidal speech where Israel is concerned, A-OK, and making a large person feel uncomfortable after the incredibly horrific opinion that morbid obesity is unhealthy. That is not okay. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, all of this goes back to Title 9. It's one of the titles that basically said
7. I thought
7. Yeah, Title 9 is a sports thing. Title 7 is it says that you can't create a hostile environment, basically, and that was in response to the integration of schools in the South where, white people would like threaten black people's lives. That's not what's happening. And it's become now universities, they're just taking like this very subjective approach to what is harassment. And I think it would be better if the laws were amended actually to specify what that entails, because it's very vague in the language. So that's why these universities can get away with sort of picking and choosing what's deemed like to create an unsafe or like hostile environment, because it's subjective. I mean, I could find something, I could feel threatened by someone using a homophobic slur, and you couldn't, or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer they just abolish the law completely and leave it up to these schools to decide. It's my law and I can say who is on it and who is not. And I don't really see a problem with that, provided it's a university. I think the broader thing is just like these universities are hotbeds for radicalism and stupidity, and the entire system that we've built in America where every young person in the country is expected to go to an indoctrination camp so they can get a desk job for $30,000 a year with $200,000 of student loan debt is crazy. Got to burn that down, that system. The system, not the colleges. Seriously, I'm not even making a joke right now. The system needs to come down. That's crazy. Most of these colleges should not even exist, and the elite colleges can exist, but whatever, they'll become irrelevant if they keep up with this kind of stuff, and then especially with the relaxation of their academic standards. Because what is Harvard going to mean in 20 years if it's like a lottery to get in, and after you leave, you're a crazy person? It's not something that I care about. I never used to ask people where they went to school, but I might have to start before I hire them, just to make sure that I'm not accidentally hiring anybody from Harvard. It's the holiday season, the Christmas season around these parts. I want to talk about that a little bit. I want to talk about this very funny article that came out. Christmas parties are, I mean, obviously the war on Christmas is great. It's like war on Christmas is the OG culture war issue. I used to, as a kid, when my grandma was still with us, she was obsessed with Fox News, and she was always talking about the war on Christmas. That was like the big one back in the day. It was, they're trying to take Christmas from you. And it was very, you know, when I go to the Kmart, I say Merry Christmas, whether or not they say Happy Holidays. And this is something that I have never cared about at all. It is Christmas for me. I say Christmas, but like, I'm not offended when someone says Happy Holidays or whatever. It's like a weird thing to care about, I think. I guess there is, you could make this argument, there's this like high level war on Christians happening, and we could talk about that another day, bring in some experts to discuss it. But in the context of workplace holidays, we went from Christmas party to holiday party. That is being stripped away as well now. It is like every semblance of the Christmas spirit has to be, I guess, just deleted. And far more problematically for me, and this has been a trend for a handful of years now in tech, no more booze at Christmas parties, which is, I think it's immoral. I think it is disgraceful. I want no part of that in this country. In 2023 in America, how dare you take away my like drunken inappropriateness at my workplace Christmas party? It's fucking crazy. The quote included things like, instead we were doing guacamole and pickleball. It's like kids are already not having sex. That's the trend, right? Like, are we wondering why really when we're talking about things like pickleball at the workplace Christmas party? It's just a complete disgrace. I don't know. What do you guys think about this?
Guacamole is not a Christmas food. You know what I mean? There are Christmas foods. Like it's not like
it's green
it's
and
the
red.
farthest. No, I guess that's true. Yeah. Well, no, it can only be a Christmas food if you like make it look like a reindeer or something. Like you put little pretzels maybe for like antlers at the top. That'd be kind of cute. Maybe some little olives like for the eyes.
I mean, I think that's the point. They don't want it to be a Christmas food. You know, they want you to.
No.
They want to break your spirit. They want you demoralized and pliable, so they can just force you through the corporate machine like sausage meat, and out you come, a neutered, blue-haired yes man.
Who I feel like everybody celebrates Christmas except for, I mean, I guess Jews don't, but you could still do the holiday party and just like add a menorah or whatever. Because I feel like even people who aren't Christians, like, I don't know, my mom works for an Indian doctor her whole life, and they're Hindu, and they celebrate Christmas because they're just like, it's an American holiday, it's fun. I don't know, like, it just seems like everybody who, except I guess for like Jews who don't do it for religious reasons, seem to celebrate it. I've even seen like, I even think like some Muslims kind of do, like, I guess like a secular version of it, like they exchange gifts and stuff. I've heard of that.
I mean, it's already I always say this, and I would get in trouble for this with some of my Jewish friends. I feel like it's already a secular holiday. Like the Christmas tree is not in the Bible. What do you think we're celebrating here? Santa Claus? That has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. And this is actually, I grew up, going to church service, and every single year they would sit us down and tell us about the true meaning of Christmas and Jesus Christ being born and all of this bullshit. And it's like, and they'd be like, it's not Santa Claus. That's not really Christmas. And then I get out in the real world and the libs are telling me that Santa Claus is, representational of Jesus Christ. It's not true. It's a pagan holiday. Let me have it. Let us have it. Let America have its pagan holiday. We have all that, what is it, on the dollar bill, all that symbology from like the Freemasons and shit, like that's baked into, that is American as occultism, paganism, as American as apple pie. I think that we need to be allowed to have these things. And at Christmas time, especially, like, I mean, we got to do it. We need a pressure release. I will say, if you wanted to switch it up, I worked at Penguin Books at the earliest part of my career, like 15 years ago. And instead of Christmas, there would be no end of the year celebration, but there would be a company-wide Halloween party, which was fire, I will say. That was absolutely incredible. I remember people hotboxing the elevators. This is like a corporate building down on the west side of Manhattan. everyone would decorate. It was like, I remember just being totally obliterated, dancing on a desk with a couple of giant hot dogs. It was like a very crazy, surreal experience. I loved it. I'm open to that if you wanted to kind of switch it up and do a different time of year or something. But the main, I think the important thing is that we've got to have a time for all of us to get together and
yeah.
It's
I
also
think
fun.
it should be Christmas, because then you can, like, I don't know, like, it just seems so classic, you know, like you get drunk and you have to do the Secret Santa thing, and you're like, what do I buy, like Cheryl from accounts? And you're like, I don't fucking know. And so you just get her like an anthropology candle because it's expensive needlessly, but like it seems nice. And then you like ask your black coworker, you're like, hey Keisha, how was Kwanzaa? And she's like, what's Kwanzaa? And you just like, you know, then you just kind of go on. You just like, oh.
Tell me about River just wrote a piece on Kwanzaa. It was titled "Abolish Kwanzaa." River, tell me why you want to abolish Kwanzaa. Take me, first of all, what is Kwanzaa?
That was actually Kwanzaa? Brandon's title, but I did, but the original was
couldn't resist
Kwanzaa,
it.
But yeah. So Kwanzaa it's a fake holiday. Like there's really like no other way to put it. It was invented in the 1960s by this radical black activist in LA named Ron Karenga, who ran an organization called US, just US. So some people said it was like United Slaves. It's actually not, it's just US. And this organization started off as this kind of weird thing where they were learning Swahili and doing karate. And it very quickly turned into a psychotic cult of personality around Karenga. They literally went to war with the Black Panthers. They were funded, and they were the US organization, because it was small and weird and focused, like concentrated in LA. The FBI and the LAPD, who were working together at the time, basically their whole thing was essentially, we're going to use US organization to fuck with the Black Panthers. And so they were giving them arms, they were giving them like intelligence. His downfall was that he kidnapped and beat 2 of his female followers who he thought were betraying him to the Black Panthers, forced detergent down their mouths, beat them with rods, electrical cords, burned them with like hot irons. He just tortured these women, and he got sent to prison. And
where he discovered the true meaning of Kwanzaa.
Right. He actually invented Kwanzaa earlier because he hated Christmas, and he was like, why would you want to be washed in the blood of a dead Jew? He also didn't care for Jews. He went to prison, and then he came out, became a professor at University of California, Long Beach, where he's now the chair of the Africana Studies Department. And his sort of rehabilitation paved the way for Kwanzaa, which he had invented earlier. It's a completely manufactured sort of multiculturalism, but it's the sort of thing that people like, because they were like, Bill Clinton was the first person to like officially recognize it. And he said it's rooted in ancient African traditions, which it's literally not. It's based on 6 principles that are also the principles of the US organization. It's all just like in Swahili words that this guy taught himself. And it's based on like basically just based on the idea of a harvest festival, which he said was drawn from various different African cultures, most of whom Black people in the United States are not descended from.
Well, in fact, it's cultures that the slave traders were descended from.
Yeah, it's okay, sis. Right.
This is endlessly fascinating to me. I think, to back up one moment, we keep saying, most Black people in America don't celebrate Kwanzaa. Almost no Black people in America celebrate Kwanzaa. Black Americans are Christian, like more Christian than the average white person. They celebrate Christmas. It's crazy. This is like the problem we have. You have one very extreme group of people who are talking about this in favor of it, and then you have a lot of white people who are clueless, who just don't know any black people, I guess, because if they knew even one, they would know that this is not a holiday that anybody celebrates. It's so crazy. But what it is it's now on our U.S. stamps. And I think that's just very problematic.
It has been since the 90s. They keep releasing new ones.
You have the United States government legitimizing a holiday that exists for one reason, and that is to drive a wedge between white and black Americans, because the common faith is a very powerful bond between people. And the fact that we all celebrate Christmas at the end of the day means something very good for race relations in the country. And if you are really, really interested in driving a wedge between those relations, what you need to do is go after Christianity, which is why so many of the Black Panthers, I think, found Muhammad and became Muslim. This is why I think like the Muslim piece of black nationalism is so important, but we could, cover that another day. And certainly I think why Ron Karenga, who is an anti-Christian, is going after this. This is what it's an actual war on Christmas rather than the fake one. And he's losing. It's all kind of goofy. It seems almost weird to be mad about it. But it's the legitimization. The fact that the government is legitimizing it does mean it's important to me. I mean, there's a new Kwanzaa stamp coming out. What is it, in 2024?
Yeah. And it's also just insane that this guy's been it's insane that someone who beat and tortured women is a tenured professor. Like, that's kind of crazy in and of itself.
How did he survive Me Too? No one survived Me Too.
Tenure, I guess. or everybody was just afraid because, he's like, he's this sacred sort of figure in the black activist world because he, I guess, recast himself as somebody who is just interested in Pan-Africanism and, resurrecting black culture, because he thought that the culture of black people in the United States is actually just white culture, which is not true. There's like a lot of traditions, a lot of like, if you look at like AAV, like in the Old South, like the dialect and stuff, there's like influence. There's a great like interchange of culture between blacks and whites in the South, where most black people lived until the Great Migration. And you see that even in like the food and certain like customs and stuff. Like in a lot of, in black weddings, for instance, people will sometimes like do this thing where they jump over a broom. And pretty much only black people do it now, but it's actually a tradition from Northern England that poor whites brought over. And in the early colonial era, when you had like indentured servants and black people basically living together in the same quarters, they passed the tradition to black people, and then white people kind of forgot about it. So there's just like, it's this very like complex like interchange of sort of black and white culture that created something unique. Like, it created country music, jazz, blues, like all kinds of amazing like things from American culture that could not exist in Africa, and they couldn't exist in England or Scotland, but they could exist in the American South. And I think that's like kind of interesting and beautiful, but anyway, that's besides the point.
I found the Kwanzaa disrespecter.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on Kwanzaa, guys? What will you be doing for Kwanzaa this year?
Well, I just remember I don't have any experience with Kwanzaa, I guess, like most people, but I do remember being a kid and being taught, I guess, in elementary school that like there were 3 major holidays around December, and it was Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa. And I remember vividly that everyone sort of knew what Christmas and Hanukkah were, and Kwanzaa was this undefined third that people know exists. Everyone sort of knows the word. They know that there's candles involved. But I think that's, if you ask most Americans, it's like this weird third undefined gender almost. So
yeah, it's crazy. I do remember this as well as a kid. Well, that would have been for me like the early 90s, knowing about Kwanzaa in this way, even seeing like a Kwanzaa menorah, which is just a knockoff actual menorah on TV with the red and green candles. And it is very confusing for a kid to see that because it's framed as a black holiday. And it is not. I mean, it's a radical political holiday. And it is, yes, it's weird, the things that we're taught that are just not true, even by us, absorbing it from the media and whatnot.
I think ironically, because it's previously. Now I think they're sort of tampering it down. They're just like, it's just about black people. But originally it was supposed to be this super radical thing. But the only people who celebrate it now are black elites. It's like activisty, like college professors and people like that. It's not actually any like working class black people who might actually have real problems. And, you know,
I am surprised it has not really taken off over the last few years, to be honest. It seems like something that you could be very useful in the middle of, you know, the 2020, 2021 cultural race wars where everybody was LARPing just the end of the world. And yet it's just, maybe there's something just so fundamentally clownish about the history that no one really wants to embrace it.
Yeah, I think it's because in a lot of ways, black families and white Southern families are similar. And it's just, I think it's a lot of even like these super woke people who are like professors now or whatever, if they actually come from like a working or even like middle class background, they're like, my grandma's gonna like freak out. She's like, why do you hate Jesus? Like, it's gonna be like that sort of thing. So they're just like, maybe not maybe not do that. So I think that's maybe why.
Awesome. Well, it's been real, folks. I think we have reached the end of this one. We'll catch you back here next week. Please make sure to rate, review, subscribe, send this to your friend. It is very important algorithmically. We got to boost those numbers up. Get Pirate Wires everywhere. Send it everywhere. Global. Go. Carry on. Sending out the army. Thank you very much. Talk to you later.